I'm very glad to speak after two social scientists who are also healers, because in my school, where I come from, there was a hate between psychoanalysts. We were the only one who had joined Lacanian school, and the social scientists, they, as Margaret said, wanted to kill each other. So in order to survive, we had to do a seminar, weekly seminar during 40 years. It was mandatory, and we entitled it Madness and the Social Link. And our point of view was a little different from what I heard. It was not to look for the cause or the risk of becoming psychotic, but to look at psychosis as a way of research. Not only, on a positive way, to look for erased traces. And immigration, of course, is a main issue in that point of view, because people coming from abroad, faraway countries, but also from rural areas, very often have erased lands, names, even ancestors, because you want to start a new life, and that does not exist anymore. And the psychotic one is doing some risky research. It's not only the risk of psychosis, but the risky research to find another, to validate their search, to inscribe again what has disappeared. So, when we were in that Lacanian school, out of the blue, my husband and I, my late husband, Jean-Marc, out of the blue, we were not psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, nor psychologists. We came from classical literature and sociology, and we decided, out of the blue, to join, to train as analysts, not so much in the school, but in a mental public hospital, without knowing why. Little by little, the patient there taught us and taught me about a very strange experience of my side. I was born, I do like Margaret, I speak of other identities. I was born during the war, in 43, in the Alps, in a combat zone. And for me, that was quite natural. My Lacanian psychoanalyst never asked any question about that. And so it was normal. But those patients that I met in the hospital, little by little, made me wonder, but that was not normal. They were telling me about, immigration from dictatorship, tortures that they suffered, and also exile, and was thinking, but it was not normal. The hijacking of people, bullets, bombing, every day, and also every day we had to flee from our houses. So little by little, I started to think about my own exile. After the war, we went to exile in Burgundy. It was completely strange for me. There were no mountains. And when I was 17, I went to Paris to study. And I can tell you, Paris is the most loneliest city you can imagine. I was scared to speak like today in public. My guts were twisting. And I wondered, that was what put me so close to the patients in the hospital. We used to speak in the common room, because there was no office, no psychoanalysis in the mental hospital. But a medical doctor had greeted us. He was also from the Lacanian school, and said, I want psychoanalysts there. But we had no office, and we worked in the common room. And in a proximity, immediacy, and also hope that they could get out of psychosis, and they did. Well, not all, of course. also simplicity, no jargon. We have to speak of the here and now, because if I say to some person, oh, you're psychotic because, you know, this and this happened, exile and so on, they say, I know, but what to do? It doesn't change anything to know it. So now the question is transference. What is transference in that case? Transference in that case is an interference, because we were doing with the patient a common quest, a common research. I always told them the first time I met them, your delusion is a research, not a disease, as our president told us, not a diagnosis, but a research, a dynamic research, to inscribe with another the erased traces. But this other is not easy to find. In totalitarian systems, like the one many of those people came from, the other is systematically destroyed. Attacks of linking by a ruthless agency which treats people like things. So how to become this other when it has no place at all? I will tell you a little story which came to my mind yesterday. Of course, those people, I saw them in the hospital, in the clinic, and also at home, where they came for a few euros, 1 or 2, because they were broke, of course, and I had a salary, so it was never a problem. And a young woman came who had no money, although she was not poor, but she did not want to tell her husband she was coming, and she did not work. So I said, okay. She was a perfect stranger in Paris, and her problem was complete insensitivity, especially toward her young baby daughter. Although apparently she did everything which was required. She looked like a good mother, but she knew she was blank. And during the days when the little girl was in daycare or in nursery or school, she would spend her days looking at the window and looking in the streets people and wondering, how do they live? She was Dutch. Her mother was Dutch. And she came, her mother's parents came from Indonesia, and I have no clue about that story and that country, or only some, of course, information. And I asked her what happened there. She said nothing. They came back after the war in Netherlands, and that's all what I knew. One day, by chance, serendipity is very important in our transference, because causal reasoning does not work, because the symbolic chain, like I would say, is broken. There is no more anybody to trust. So when there is no symbol, time cannot be measured. Time is measured by symbols. And when time stops. And we cannot use a causal reasoning because cause is before, in the past, the effect in the future, and doesn't work. So chance is very important. By chance, I was given a book, it was in 1993, I remember, by a Dutch author, Jerome Provers, called Decanted Red, which was just translated into French. That was a pure chance. I read it, it was about concentration camps in Jakarta, the homeland of her family, mother's family. So I told her about the book and said, look, something happened in Jakarta. She stared at me. as usual. And then my own childhood in the war woke up. And I say, you know, I've been in prison during the war, in the womb of my mother, who had been arrested by the Nazi. She stared at me again, and I thought, oh, I made a blunder, I broke all the rules. I was not very proud of myself. Then, time passed. She was, of course, more alive, it was better, but still, something was a stalemate, in a stalemate. Another coincidence happened. It is as if, but it is not as if, it is a story which is telling, which is waiting to be told to somebody, but at the condition that this somebody speaks against all rules in our country, in our job, in our psychoanalytical neutrality. A little later after, a family member, a friend of her family told her, you know, your mother was imprisoned as a child in a concentration camp by Japanese in Jakarta. She was completely stunned. She went to her mother, said, why didn't you speak about that? And the mother said, when we came back to Netherlands, we were not homeless, but we were poor, we were ashamed, and we couldn't speak about it. We were strangers in our homeland. And the mother did not mention the tortures, which are described in the book. She did not speak about it, but of course it was there. So I thought, and after that, I go quick, of course, it takes time. She started to learn Dutch language. She started to know about the story of this country, the war and so on, and she started to have a life of her own. Okay, so about that, what kind of unconscious is at work in that transference? You see that the transference in between us was not a projection, because there is no in and out. So it was just interference between our two stories, and a part of mine which had been erased. I always had known my mother had been in prison pregnant of me, but it was normal. Only then I realized, in the context of her story, that was something strange. So the unconscious at work is not the repressed unconscious, and that is the confusion in psychoanalysis. We don't look for repressed desire, and Freud himself said so. The unconscious is not always repressed. The other unconscious is a cut-out unconscious. He says so, and looking for historical truth. And so this other unconscious cut-out is not made, as Lacan would say, by signifiers, because the chain of speech is broken. It's made by visions, voices, bodily images, sensory images, very powerful, which look for another to be transformed into words. And Freud spoke about that. The aim of psychoanalysis is historical truth. In his last book, Moses and the Monotheism, when he was himself in a total loneliness, persecuted by the Nazi, all his books had been burnt in 1933, persuaded that psychoanalysis was put to an end. And in that context, where he was becoming an immigrant in the strange city of London, he wrote about this other aim of psychoanalysis. I must tell you that Lacan never addressed that part. I'm sorry to say that. He, of course, refused to address the problem of transference in psychosis. It's written in the Écrit. Why? Because in our country, we had no tradition whatsoever about the transference in trauma, in world trauma. During First World War, while there were psychoanalysts all over Europe, of course a little number in England, William Rivers, Frida von Reichmann in Germany, Ferenczi in Hungary, also in probably Netherlands. In France, there was no psychotherapy of war trauma. Recent book by a historian stated that. So Lacan was not raised in that tradition. Besides, there is another important point, is that I discovered recently that, in Netherlands, you have a tradition of working on dissociation. The body keeps the score, as writes Professor van der Kok. But also, I met some people, a man who's in France, whose father was part of psychotherapists working with coming back deportees. And this did not exist in France at all. So that's explain why, after some moment, we, Jean-Max and I, decided to emigrate. Like the birds during the summer. We had been invited by Jim Gornick, who is here, John Muller, and the philosopher Bill Richardson at Austin Reed Center, where this transference was actively put in action since a long time. The psychoanalysis of psychosis. And so we went there during several summers. And we met the name of Sullivan, Frida von Reichmann, completely unknown in our country. As well as we met there we met Benedetti, who came from the Jubilee of Otto Will. And it was our first encounter. We invited him in our school and in our hospital, and he invited us to the ISPS. That's how we joined ISPS in the Torino conference, where I met Anne Silver. Okay. So, we could say that Benedetti speaks of the creation through transference of a transitional subject. Maurizio Petticcia will speak about it tomorrow in a symposium. So this transitional subject is the subject in between the analyst and the patient, which thrives to inscribe those erased traces. And of course it doesn't go smooth. As Margaret said, dialogue is very dangerous. We make progress, and then suddenly back to square one to find new things to be symbolized. So it goes always in a rhythm, and a very rough rhythm, where sometimes the patient go back to the hospital. But this is not a bad move. They usually say, oh, we go back to find colleagues again over there. Well, one of them said to me. When I see supervisees, now I'm old, I always ask them, where do your patients come from? And they say, oh, Africa, Sri Lanka, Syria, Middle East, or some village out of nowhere in France. And I tell them, well, that's really big. You know, Africa is big. Please, take a map and look at the map, precise map of their country. And then you will find with them names which speak to them, which no mouth pronounce anymore. You know, in the case of no otherness, when the human relationship broke for whatever reason, things talk. Like Margaret showed us, I was very moved by that, the statue that is on this logo. The city speaks. This statue representing the city speaks to people in the street, speak about hope that they can rebuild. So things speak when there is no human words. Elephant speaks, animal speaks, also mountains, I know that. All they have a lot of names, you know, every bit and pieces, every rock is named. The rivers, all those names are talking to people, and you have to make them speak. When I was, how much I have? 5 minutes? Okay. When I was telling you, I was sitting, when I work with those patients, I work in a proximity, in the present time, because the past doesn't exist, in expectancy, hope, and in simplicity. No jargon, no foreclosure of the name of the father, and so on. Then, those principles were coined by Thomas Salmon, which I did not know at that time, who was a civilian in the First World War, who had been drafted by the military to go to the front in England and in France and bring back principles, orientations for the future casualty as they were going into the war. He was, Thomas Salmon, a psychiatrist in Ellis Island, and he was chosen for his very, very important relationship with all the immigrants who were coming there, and the one who lost it, who became mad. He had created a special ward for them. So, this is a lesson, not only from madness, but also from the first psychotherapists who were immigrants. Harry Stack Sullivan, grandparents were boat people, coming from the potato famine in Ireland. And his grandmother had lost her first husband and a baby, like today, on the Mediterranean. Frida von Reichmann came to Chestnut Lodge to have a summer job fleeing the Nazi in Germany. So I just want to end this talk by saying that immigration is not only always, as you said previously, not always a mishap or you know, us and them. It is always something that those patients thrive and with an intelligence, underground intelligence for connection with somebody different by reaching erased parts in his story, in the psychoanalyst story. Thank you.